The glass walls of the executive suite always made me feel like I was being observed from every angle, even when the room was empty. But that morning, the feeling sharpened into something colder, like every reflection of mine was being catalogued, judged, quietly rewritten. The CFO's assistant met me near the elevator with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Mara, they're waiting in the audit room." "They," I repeated. Her hand twitched toward the folder she was holding, like she wanted to hide behind it. "Richard, Evelyn, the auditors." I didn't ask more. People only lower their voice like that when the decision has already been made above your head. The hallway leading to the audit room felt longer than usual, bright and sterile. When I reached the door, I noticed something odd. The blinds were already drawn shut. That never happened. The CFO, Jonas Reed, sat at the far end of the table. His posture was perfect, like he was afraid any crease in his suit might indicate guilt. My uncle, Richard Ellison, stood with both hands pressed flat on the table, the position he always used when he was preparing to deliver a verdict. Not a discussion. And Evelyn, my cousin, sat with one leg crossed over the other, a silk scarf draped around her neck, her expression soft, almost apologetic. Almost, but her eyes gleamed in a way I recognized instantly. Victory. It settled into my stomach before anyone spoke. Richard cleared his throat, but his voice was too steady, rehearsed. "Mara, we're placing you on temporary leave until you explain the discrepancies Evelyn brought forward." The room felt still, like the air was waiting for my reaction. "Discrepancies," I repeated, my voice flat. Evelyn leaned forward, fingers laced delicately. "It's nothing personal. I just did a routine review and things didn't line up. Numbers, authorizations, resource allocations." She tilted her head the way she used to when we were 12, and she'd blamed me for breaking a vase she had smashed herself. The auditors avoided eye contact. Jonas blinked twice, his tell for stress, but he didn't speak. Richard continued, "Until this is resolved, your authority is revoked. Effective immediately." Effective immediately. The two words hit harder than the accusation. I stayed standing. I didn't sit. I didn't ask for paperwork. I didn't even ask what exactly Evelyn had claimed. That reaction, my stillness, seemed to unsettle the room more than anger would have, because they all expected the reasonable one to explain herself. "Mara," Richard said, as if my silence was disrespectful, "you understand this is necessary." I met his eyes. He didn't look at me like family. He looked at me like a liability. "I understand," I said. Evelyn's smirk flickered, unable to hide behind her mask in time. Richard exhaled, relieved. He thought that was the end of it. He had no idea it was the beginning. The moment I stepped out of the room, the hallway felt different, as if the walls themselves were bracing for fallout. People pretended to flip through their phones as I passed. Others walked faster, like proximity to me might pull them into the storm. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. And in that sterile, humming box, another realization hit me, clean and sharp. This wasn't about numbers. This was about removing me. And they expected me to go quietly. I almost laughed. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Not anymore. It's strange how humiliation doesn't begin with the moment itself. It starts earlier, years earlier, somewhere small and forgettable. For me, it started with a school science fair. I was 9 when I built a miniature solar car out of scrap metal and wires from my father's old radios. The day I brought it to the kitchen, grease still smudged on my forehead. My mother looked at me like I had created something legendary. But she died 2 years later, and the house changed its temperature overnight. Richard took me in like his own daughter, the way he always said to friends, to investors, to anyone who would listen. But to Evelyn, I was the extra piece in the puzzle she didn't want to share space with. On the day I was supposed to present that solar car to the judges, Evelyn threw a tantrum because she didn't want to attend. She wanted to go skating instead. Richard promised to make it up to me. He didn't. Evelyn skated that evening. My project missed check-in time. The solar car never made it to the judges' table. I learned something important that day. In our house, inconvenience outweighed merit. And Evelyn was never inconvenient. When I earned a robotics scholarship at 16, Richard skimmed the letter and said, "Good job, kiddo," like I'd remembered to take the trash out. 10 minutes later, Evelyn walked in with a rhinestone crown from a regional beauty pageant, and suddenly my accomplishment evaporated under the glow of her photo shoot. That night, the scholarship letter disappeared. Years later, when I turned the strategy department from a cramped storage room into a functional, respected division, Richard praised Evelyn for leading the company into its next era. She hadn't even been in the building the week I finalized the transformation, but she could make clients laugh. She could pose well in marketing photos. She could turn tears on and off like a switch. And Richard always interpreted tears as truth. In the years I lived with them after my parents' accident, Evelyn learned how to weaponize softness. I learned how to disappear. Be the reasonable one, Richard used to say. I became excellent at it, too excellent, because they mistook my restraint for obedience, and my silence for consent. My department felt different when I walked back in after the audit meeting, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next instruction. A junior analyst rushed toward me, then froze, unsure if she was even allowed to speak to someone who'd just been publicly undermined. "Mara," she said softly, "we heard something upstairs. Is it true?" I didn't answer. She didn't need to be pulled into the middle of this. When I reached my office, my nameplate was gone. In its place, Evelyn Ellison, Acting Director of Strategic Operations. The letters gleamed like a fresh wound. I opened my office door slowly. The layout was familiar, but nothing felt like mine anymore. Someone had moved my desk organizer, shifted my notes, touched the mug my mother had given me when I graduated. Violation tastes metallic. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from team members who were afraid to say too much. "Are we really under her now? Did you approve the budget freeze? Tell us what to do." I turned the screen face down. They wanted leadership. I didn't even have my job title anymore. I sat at my desk, moved one drawer open, then closed it again, because suddenly the room felt like a museum of everything I'd sacrificed to keep the department alive. 12-hour nights, weekends that blurred into Monday, deadlines that only existed because Evelyn promised things she didn't understand. And suddenly, under the hum of the ceiling lights, I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. The last letter my mother wrote before she died. I didn't keep many things, but I kept that. Her handwriting looped gently across the page. "Do not build your life in houses where you must shrink to fit." That sentence returned to me now with the clarity of a knife sliding through silk. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew exactly why. And for the first time in years, I felt something unshakable rise in my chest. Not rage, not grief, precision. The kind of precision that comes right before a plan forms. Quietly, invisibly, efficiently. I locked my office door. Not because I was afraid someone would come in, but because I needed to move without interruption. The first thing I did was open the project management system. Evelyn's audit folder was empty, of course it was. She never posted anything there herself. She just signed off on work she didn't do. But the approvals, the invoices, the vendor agreements, the consulting contracts, those told a different story. It took 30 minutes to trace the payments, 5 minutes to confirm the real problem, and 10 seconds to realize what Evelyn had done. She had routed company funds through a consulting firm that only existed on paper, a firm registered to a mailbox 2 blocks from her apartment. Not a mistake, not a miscalculation. Fraud. The kind of fraud people go to prison for. Jonas must have known. He was too good with numbers not to. But he'd stayed silent, the same way he stayed silent in the meeting when I was accused. The same way everyone stayed silent when Evelyn cried. I clicked open a blank document. Title, Operational Integrity Internal Review. The truth didn't need exaggeration. It only needed arrangement, so I arranged it. Every invoice, every altered budget line, every fake consulting approval, every timeline she'd sabotaged, every email where she pushed a deadline she didn't understand. And then, the masterpiece, the screenshots of her sending company documents to the private consulting firm she secretly owned. I didn't add commentary. I didn't highlight sentences. I didn't moralize. Truth is sharp enough on its own. When I finished compiling everything, the document was long enough to fold a career in half. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Revenge delivered too early becomes noise. Revenge delivered at the right moment becomes consequence. I sat back, closed the laptop, and looked around my half-lit office. This wasn't the end of my career. This was the blueprint. The one Evelyn unknowingly helped me design. The quiet plan she would never see coming. The conference suite on the top floor wasn't a room you entered casually. It was the kind of room where verdicts were made behind polished doors and silence could bruise. When I walked in, the temperature shifted. Richard was pacing. Jonas sat stiffly with a stack of printouts he pretended to review. And Evelyn stood near the window, arms crossed, pretending not to be anxious. But her foot tapped soundlessly against the marble floor. The moment I closed the door, everyone froze. Richard tried to force a smile. "Mara, let's try to resolve this rationally." Rationally. The word tasted familiar. He used it every time he wanted me to shrink to fit the situation he created. I placed my portfolio on the table. The quiet thud sounded louder than anyone expected. "Before we start," I said, "you all need to read something." Jonas's face drained the moment he saw the title on the front page of my report. Operational Integrity, Internal Review. He didn't touch it at first. Neither did Richard. But Evelyn, always too confident in her ability to bend reality, snatched the report and flipped it open. The first page snapped whatever composure she had left. She scanned faster, eyes widening, breaths shortening, like she was watching her own house burn in slow motion and realizing she had lit the match. "What is this?" she whispered, even though she already knew. Jonas swallowed. I thought those documents were confidential." "They are," I said, "which is why the fraud stands out." Evelyn turned the page too fast, tearing the corner. Invoices, vendor logs, wire transfers routed through her consulting firm. A signature traced back to her tablet. Timestamps. The truth, line by line. "You're mistaken," she said, voice cracking. This looks worse than it is." Richard snatched the document, scanned the second page, and went still. The room shifted. For the first time in my life, I watched him look at Evelyn the way I'd seen him look at bedrock cracks, evaluating risk. "Is this accurate?" he asked softly. Evelyn straightened. "Dad, she's twisting this. She always twists things. She wants my job. It's literally your bank account," I said calmly. The silence that followed felt like a floor dropping. Jonas covered his face with his hands. Richard leaned heavily against the table, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him with more force than he had prepared for. "You blindsided us," he said, voice low. "No," I replied. "I corrected the narrative you built." Evelyn snapped. "You can't walk in here and accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you," I said. "I'm showing you." The room stayed very still, the way people freeze when they realize the consequences are already in motion. I reached into my portfolio, pulled out my resignation letter, and laid it gently on the table. "This is effective immediately," Richard's voice cracked. "You don't have to do this." "I already have." I left the conference room like someone stepping out of a burning building that no longer held sentimental value. The elevator doors closed, sealing their voices behind a dull hum. My reflection stared back at me, not triumphant, not shaken, just free. By the time I reached the lobby, the fallout had already begun. Notifications exploded on my phone. Urgent emails from legal, flagged messages from compliance, missed calls from Richard, an emergency request from the board clients, demanding clarity project leads. Panicking Evelyn had bragged too loudly for too long. Her promises built entire departments on foundations she didn't understand. And now those foundations were cracking in synchronized failure. Outside, the early evening wind carried the sound of traffic, distant, indifferent. My phone vibrated nonstop. 16 missed calls, then 17. Next was Evelyn. Her voice message came through sharp and shrill. "You think you're innocent? You think you'll survive this? You just destroyed everything." I blocked the number. The building behind me glowed with artificial warmth, but I felt none of it. The company had taken years from me, piece by piece, calling it responsibility, loyalty, maturity. But the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight fell off my shoulders with a clarity I didn't expect. A clarity that felt almost dangerous. The next morning was strangely quiet. I woke without an alarm, fed Cooper, made coffee slowly, not because I was tired, but because I could. Before leaving for my meeting with a new employer, an offer I'd ignored twice, I noticed a small envelope slipped under my front door. My name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's. A chill ran through me. The return address wasn't hers. It belonged to the law firm Richard used for corporate matters. Inside was a letter with a note from the attorney. Your uncle requested this be held until a future date. We believe that date has arrived. My hands trembled as I unfolded the old paper. The ink was faded, but her words were steady. If you're reading this, Myra, then something broke where you were trying so hard to hold everything together. You deserved more than what they offered you. You always did. Everything your father left belongs to you. Not them. I blinked hard, the print blurred. Attached was a legal notice. I was the rightful heir to my father's shares, 18% of Ellison Technologies. Richard had kept the paperwork buried, for years, not to protect me, but to keep me dependent on him, to keep me tied to Evelyn's shadow. My chest tightened, but not from pain, from comprehension. He didn't raise me out of compassion. He raised me out of convenience. The realization sliced deeper than any corporate betrayal. I folded the papers back into the envelope carefully, as if the truth inside could shatter if I mishandled it. Then I left for my meeting. The new company's office was bright, modern, alive. People greeted each other without fear. The air hummed with actual collaboration, not politics. When the hiring director introduced me to the team, no one measured me against someone else's reputation. They simply shook my hand like I belonged. Later, standing near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, my phone buzzed. A message from Richard. We need you. Come back. We can fix this. Another from Jonas. Evelyn's under investigation. The board wants to speak with you. And finally, Evelyn, you ruined me. Why? I stared at the messages. Not with satisfaction, not with regret, with clarity. I typed nothing. I blocked all three. Behind me, the hiring director walked over. Ready to see your new office? I nodded. The hallway was lined with sunlight. My footsteps felt grounded in a way they hadn't in years. When I reached the doorway of my new office, the director smiled. It's yours. I stepped inside. Clean desk, open windows, no ghosts, no expectations built on my silence, just space. A place where I didn't have to prove my worth by shrinking. As I placed my bag down, I whispered the final truth out loud, more to myself than anyone. Walking away didn't break me. It freed me from being the glue for people who never held anything together. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt the quiet not as a burden, but as a home. A year can pass quietly, like sand slipping through fingers, or it can rearrange your entire life. Mine did both. The new job didn't feel new anymore. My name on the office door held weight, not out of fear but respect. People asked for my insight, not my silence. And the work finally resembled the version of my life I used to imagine when I was younger, when hope still had a place. But some echoes never fully disappear. It started on a Thursday morning. My assistant, Leela, tapped lightly on the doorframe. You have someone waiting in the lobby. She says it's urgent. Urgent was a word I didn't associate with my old life anymore. But the moment I walked into the lobby, urgency had a face. Jonas, thinner, eyes sunken, suit rumpled like he hadn't slept in days. Mara, please, I need a moment. He followed me into a quiet corner of the cafe area, hands shaking as he wrapped them around the coffee cup Leela handed him. I'm sorry, he began, sorry. A word he had owed me for years. He swallowed hard. Ellison Technologies is falling apart. Investors pulled out. Evelyn's firm, her fake firm, revealed everything. They're facing criminal charges. The board fired Richard 2 months ago. I remained quiet. He kept talking. They investigated the consulting fraud, the misallocated budgets, the data breaches. Data breaches. My stomach tightened. What breaches, Jonas? He exhaled like the truth was physically heavy. Evelyn leaked internal IP to competitors, not just budgets, designs, algorithms, entire prototypes. He looked up at me, finally meeting my eyes. She blamed you. Of course she did. And Richard? I asked. He tried to cover it, destroyed emails, altered logs. He resigned before the board could vote to remove him. My jaw tightened. And why are you here, Jonas? He pulled a small folder from his bag and slid it toward me. Because there's something you need to see. Inside was a printout of a legal notice. My mother's name, my father's estate, a final clause. One Richard kept hidden. If Mara refuses her inheritance or is misled into relinquishing it, the shares automatically convert into voting power after 1 year. Voting power. Over what remained of the company. Jonas whispered, "You legally control what's left of Ellison Technologies." I felt the gravity of the revelation anchor somewhere deep inside me. "Why tell me?" I asked. He looked down, ashamed. "Because I've spent a year watching a company fall apart because the only person who ever held it together walked away. And because," his voice cracked, "I should have protected you when I had the chance." I stared at the folder, the past returning not with pain, but with clarity. "I don't want control of them," I said. "You don't have to want them," he replied softly. "But you have them." A full minute passed before he added the final blow, and they know. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. Return address, Ellison Technologies, temporary board chair. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was an invitation, a formal request to attend the emergency board session. The words felt brittle, like they would crumble if I breathed too hard. "We request your presence to determine the future of the company." I didn't answer, not for a week. On the morning of the vote, I woke to a quiet home. Cooper snored softly at the foot of the bed. Sunlight fell across the window like something warm, honest. At 8:45 a.m., I drove to the Ellison building for the first time in a year. The lobby looked the same, but the energy, it was different, fractured, tense, waiting. The boardroom door was open. Every head turned when I entered. Richard sat at the far end, older by a decade. Evelyn looked exhausted, mascara smudged, confidence long gone. The new interim chair cleared her throat. "Mara, thank you for coming." I didn't sit. "There's nothing to discuss," I said calmly. "We need your direction," the chair insisted. "You own the deciding shares." Evelyn scoffed, voice brittle. "Oh, please, she wants to see us suffer." I met her eyes. "No," I said, "I don't." Richard leaned forward. "Mara, we made mistakes, but this company is our legacy." "Our," I repeated softly. He flinched. The room waited for my verdict. Their salvation, their doom, their consequences, all hanging in silence. I placed a single envelope on the table. "What is that?" Jonas asked quietly. "My decision," I said. Evelyn lunged forward, trying to snatch it, but the chair slid it out of her reach. With a deep breath, the chair opened it. Inside was a notarized document, a transfer agreement. "I'm dissolving my voting power," I said. "All 18% will be sold, not to competitors, not to investors." Richard's eyes widened in alarm. "But to the employees." The room froze. I continued. "Every engineer, every analyst, every project lead who kept this place running while you all played empire-building games will own the shares you buried." Jonas covered his mouth with his hand. Richard whispered, "You're giving it away." "No," I said. "I'm setting it free." Evelyn slammed her hand against the table. "You can't do that." "I already filed it this morning," I replied. "Your signature isn't required." The chair looked at me with something like awe. Richard broke first. "You could have saved us." "I wasn't supposed to save you," I said, "and you were never supposed to own me." I turned to leave, but at the door, I stopped. Without looking back, I said the final line that had lived in me for months. "You didn't lose the company. You lost the person who was willing to hold it together." The door closed behind me with a quiet click. Not an ending, a release. Outside, as I stepped into the sunlight, Leela called to update me on a new project launch at my actual job. Right there on the sidewalk, in the warmth of the morning, surrounded by a city that felt alive again, I realized the truth. The surprise wasn't the inheritance. The surprise was that I no longer needed it. Power mattered less than peace, and peace was finally mine.